One of the biggest reality TV shows and one of the best shows on History Channel is Pawn Stars. The show follows Rick Harrison and his family who own and run a pawn shop on the Las Vegas Strip as they purchase, sell, and estimate the value of historical items. However, not every deal they make is a perfect bargain, since even the best are sometimes wrong or get cheated. Here are 10 of the worst times the Pawn Stars got horribly scammed on the show. Corey Harrison basically grew up in the pawn shop, but when he first started working the night shift all by himself as an 18-year-old, he wasn't exactly experienced and didn't know what to expect. And it seems like the word got out about the greenhorn in the shop because Big Hoss bought not one but 6 fake Rolex watches in just 1 week, which amounted to a total loss of $4,000 for the shop.
Want to know the difference between these two Rolexes right here? This one's worth $2,500. This one's worth nothing.
What doesn't look right is there's some pitting right here. And that crack right there is from when they casted it. It didn't happen later. If it's an original, the casting will all be right.
Austin Chumlee Russell often seems to be the scapegoat when something goes wrong at the pawn shop, but it is mostly deserved. In one episode, he was minding the shop by himself when he was offered a Gibson mandolin. Unfortunately, it was one of the thousands of fakes that can be found around the US and was an A model with the Gibson on the headstock and the old script. It did have the decals on the edges, and through one of the F's you could even see the stamp of the Gibson logo, but besides that it seemed different. Chumlee still bought the mandolin for $1,500 despite the fact that his purchase limit is $1,000, which is not unfounded. A friend and a music shop owner later estimated the mandolin's worth to be just $100.
Have you done any research on it?
I've got a Bacon and Days Silver Bell No. 3 gold-plated banjo.
Well, that's a fancy banjo. I'll give you that. So how much you want for it?
You write me a check for $10,000, I'll walk away right now.
In 2012, Corey purchased what he thought to be a San Francisco Giants uniform that legendary baseball player Willie Mays had worn in a game in 1961 for $31,000. However, the alarm bells should have started ringing in his head right away since the uniform was in an impeccable condition and Willie Mays wasn't exactly known to shy away from sliding in the dirt. Apart from that, the seller couldn't produce a certificate of authentication, but Big Hoss bought it nonetheless. After the Harrisons failed to resell it at the asking price of $80,000 in their shop, it was eventually auctioned off 2 years later for just above $19,000. As it turned out, the uniform was not only an almost $12,000 loss and had never been worn by Mays during a Giants game, it had never even been his uniform in the first place. So it seems like Corey was still lucky under the circumstances, as the loss could have been much bigger, but that's probably not much of a comfort to him.
One of the biggest losses I probably ever took in this business.
Some of the biggest losses that the older of the two pawn shop owners have ever made happened back in the late 1970s and early 80s, when the so-called cubic zirconias or CZs first appeared on the market. These clean-cut synthetic diamonds fooled innumerable pawn shops all across the United States, as they would appear to be 100% real whenever tested at that time. Richard Harrison's shop suffered a loss of around $30,000 due to the fake diamonds, and even filmed a PSA about CZs and how to detect the fake diamonds. In a nutshell, the zirconias are too perfect, and if you can't find even the slightest hint of a scratch or the like, they are most probably false. So you may want to carefully check them out under a magnifying glass, or even take them to an expert for examination.
Yeah, I would imagine I would, yes.
It's in excellent shape, but I quite frankly know nothing about it.
In the episode Corey's Big Play from Season 5, we got to witness another rare mistake by Rick when he bought something despite having doubts about its authenticity. A seller offered a 19th century Wells Fargo strongbox with 2 old prison ball and chain sets from the Yuma and Folsom prisons, and even though Rick instantly identified the ball and chain sets as fakes, he still paid $450 for everything. Another wake-up call should have been the fact that the owner was pretty defensive about his items, but Rick still thought he could make a little profit, only to have his hopes shattered when he talked to the expert. Mark, the Beard of Knowledge Hall Patton, called the box a complete piece of fantasy and told Rick that it was one of the most faked items altogether.
This is a complete fantasy piece.
That sounds really, really high, but then again, I've been wrong before. Before we do anything, let me find out what it is. Let me call someone up. He runs an aviation museum, so
Okay.
he'll tell us where it's.
In one episode of the Pawn Stars, a studio musician called Vic Flick came to Rick Harrison looking to sell a 1961 Fender Stratocaster. Rick decided to buy the guitar for $55,000 as it had such history and had been played by great talents. However, Vic Flick is not exactly a legend or even a household name, and most of the songs where the guitar has been used weren't exactly huge hits. So when Rick set the resale price at $90,000, the guitar just started gathering dust until the next auction came along. But it came even worse for Rick as the Fender Stratocaster was eventually sold for just $20,000, leaving Rick with a $35,000 loss.
Yes,
Okay.
it's a 1961 Fender Stratocaster.
Vic Flick guitar.
You think this is appropriate for my pawn shop?
You never have to tow a car again.
It is a money-making machine. It can be.
Guitars are pretty common items in pawn shops, but when someone came in with a guitar claiming it was one of Jimi Hendrix's collection pieces, Rick Harrison called in an expert just to be on the safe side. Jesse Amoroso of Cowtown Guitars confirmed that the '63 Olympic white Fender Stratocaster had indeed been played by Jimi Hendrix, as it showed all the marks and signs of usage, had all the historic photos and documents, and most importantly, the serial number. Eventually, the music expert estimated the guitar's value to be around $1 million, so Rick would naturally try to underbid the seller in order to make a big profit. However, the seller wasn't prepared to go lower than $750,000, and so they didn't come to an agreement, even though Rick ultimately offered $600,000. But the guitar still made it on the market later, and surprisingly, the seller was then Amoroso of the Cowtown Guitars, so it seems like there was some backdoor business going on.
A guy came in earlier with a 1716 book on the trial of witches, and I just have no idea what it's worth. So I'm calling it.
In the episode Say It Ain't So of the 6th season, Rick was offered a book that had allegedly been signed by baseball legend shoeless Joe Jackson, whose signature is one of the rarest to find. Even though Rick was skeptical about the whole thing, since it is the most fake sports signature in the world, and the seller's certificate of authenticity was also rather questionable, he decided to purchase the book for $13,000. However, after he spent all that money, his book expert Rebecca told him that the signature was most likely forged, and when Rick got a second opinion from an authenticator, he became devastated by the news that it wasn't only a phony, but it was also ridiculously poorly done.
Do you know how rare it is to find his signature?
No, not at all.
It's the rarest sports signature, period.
When a man dressed in a nice suit entered the pawn shop and offered Rick Harrison a pair of diamond earrings which were of finest quality, Rick naturally made further inquiries as to how the seller obtained them. The seller had all the right answers and could even produce a receipt, so they came to an agreement and Harrison paid $40,000 for the jewelry. However, 3 days later the police came to the shop and it turned out that the earrings had been stolen. They took them back to the owner and even caught the thief, but the money was lost, and according to Rick, this was the biggest bust he'd ever had in the pawn shop.
All the questions, he even had a receipt. I gave him $40,000.
A while back, I bought the Wayne's World card. I gave it to Bob to restore it. I'm picking it up.
Ready to party?
If the Harrison can't resell an item at their gold and silver pawn shop, it is usually auctioned off at some point, and that often comes with a loss. So when Rick went to Julian's Auctions in LA and offered several items, including a 1940s Indian motorcycle with a sidecar, as well as the Fender Stratocaster that Vic Flick brought in, which we mentioned earlier, he was unfortunately in for a big disappointment. In addition to suffering a $29,000 loss on the bike and a $35,000 loss on the guitar, Rick's other items apparently didn't sell too well either, and he reportedly lost around $100,000 at the auction overall. Thank you so much for watching, guys, and don't forget to leave a thumbs up and subscribe to our channel if you're new. Also, don't forget to turn that post notification bell on so you never miss our uploads. Thank you again for watching, and we'll see you